right, everyone, welcome back to another HiBob webinar. I'm Ali from the HiBob marketing team. We're so excited to have you with us on today's session that's focused all about people analytics. We're going to give our stragglers here just a couple of minutes before we get started, but everybody stay tuned. We'll get started in just a second. All right, for those just joining, we are about to get started, just giving everybody about 1 to 2 minutes to join. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So again, welcome everybody to another HiBob webinar. I know we were all just together last week in our webinar that was really engaging and focused heavily on onboarding and pre-boarding. But today we have an equally exciting session for you with 3 panelists who I think are really going to be able to contribute a lot of insight to you and your process. So a couple of things about the webinar. Today's session is all about people analytics. I think some feedback that we've gotten from the HiBob community over the last few months in particular, and definitely in 2020 in particular, is that it requires a lot of data and analysis and numbers to really prove to the C-suite where to justify HR spend. So every dollar that's spent has to be justified, and beyond that, figuring out things like morale, attrition, the best use cases for employees internally all require a sense of understanding numbers, data, and reporting that maybe is a little bit newer to the HR function than it is for others. So we've cultivated a really amazing panel here to help sort of assess these concerns and help you figure out what numbers you should be paying attention to, what data is really important for you and your team as you move into 2021, and how you can use that data, most importantly, to help take care of your people in the best way possible. So as we get started, I'd love to introduce our panelists here. To give you some context, we're going to have the panel discussion here for the first 45 minutes. And then the last 15 minutes, we're going to have our in-house product superstar, Keshet Rosenthal, walk us through a little bit of HiBob's people analytics tools, so you can see exactly what we do in the space and how we enable our customers to use data to make better HR decisions daily. So to kick things off, let me introduce our panel. So first with us, I have Alina Zimmermann, who is the head of people experience at Zenjob. I have Nick Holmes, who's the head of HR at Distrelec Group. And I have Joe Tesznar, who's the strategic workforce planning and resourcing manager at MAPS. Such a pleasure to have you guys with us today. So excited to hear what you have to share on this topic. Before we go any further, would love to do a round of introductions. So Alina, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. As rightfully mentioned, I'm the head of people experience at Zenjob, which is a Berlin-based tech company. What we do is a matching platform for side jobs. And people experience for us means everything basically after we have started to recruit somebody. So throughout the whole employee lifecycle, measuring that experience and finding ways to improve it. More concretely, that means we work with the people and org growth teams, working on all of the people management practices about learning and development and other functions, performance management, and so on, as well as people support, focusing on the operational part of our job and making that really stellar, as well as workplace, where it's all about finding the right operationalization of our culture and values, as well as finding a great workspace. So as being responsible for that, I do a lot of measuring of that people experience and finding the data to find the insights to make it all better. And maybe a bit of a quick background, I'm super passionate about the topic. Before joining the sphere of people and culture, I actually worked as a management consultant at McKinsey. So that was all about presenting data to the C-level at my clients and yeah, based on that, arriving decisions and supporting them into making that decision and convincing them. So happy to answer all questions on that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alina. And like Alina mentioned, we will be taking questions from our audience today, like we do with all of our panels. So feel free to start already submitting questions. We have a few that are in right now. Continue to submit these questions, and we will be sure to answer them during the panel today. Nick, would love an intro of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, guys. Pleasure to be on this afternoon, or wherever you guys are dialing in from. So I'm the head of HR for Distrelec Group. So we are a B2B distributor across Europe. We've got over 500 heads across the business across Europe, and I've got 10 in my team, from HR business partners to payroll to HR project managers and beyond. And I'm in charge of the entire people operation piece for Distrelec. From start to finish of the employee lifecycle. So I report to the CEO and also have a dotted line to our MD, which means I'm talking to big dreamers and detail people on a daily basis. So getting across our needs and our wishes in our HR function, I've managed to toe that line quite nicely in recent times. So hopefully I can give you guys some tips and some really interesting insights and debate as we go through the discussion today. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here, Nick. And last but not least, Joe.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Tesznar. I'm the Strategic Workforce Planning and Resourcing Manager at Money and Pension Service, or MAPS for short. So I've worked here for just over a year. We are an organisation that was created by merging 3 separate organisations into one. So I joined at a very exciting time when we were looking at lots of post-merger integration work. With my role focuses primarily on, it's a real mix of operational and strategic HR work, including workforce planning and strategic resourcing, pay and reward initiatives, HR and payroll systems consolidation, making sure that we have the systems and processes in place to help us manage our workforce, basically. So lots of data, stats, workforce models, links with finance and budgets. On a more personal note, I don't have a typical HR background. I'm actually, I was a software developer / data analyst who moved into HR. So my approach is very kind of analytical and numbers driven. So I hope I'll be able to contribute to the conversation.
Yeah, sounds like you're the perfect man for the job today. So for those just joining us, again, welcome to the webinar. Today's session is all focused on people analytics and the data and resources and reporting that HR professionals in today's fastest growing and most modern companies use to superpower their workforces. So whether that means accelerating the output and productivity of your team, whether that means helping present numbers to the C-suite to justify resources, or simply to report on company metrics, that's what we're going to be talking all about today. Like always, please feel free to submit questions in the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. We will be sure to get to those. I have a few here lined up, and we hope to get a ton more, as we always do, from our audience. So with that in mind, let's kick it off. So first question is for each of you in turn. At its most simple basis, what are the biggest data points, reports, pieces of analytics that you look at on a daily basis to help run your team, and why are they critical for you? Joe, we'll go to you first.
Okay, I think what's on a daily basis, I often review how's the workforce changing. So primarily looking at changes in workforce composition. So looking at who's joining, who's leaving, any kind of changes in the makeup of our workforce, what type of workers. Is this in line with our workforce plans? Is this in line with what we forecasted to achieve? I also regularly look at changes in the workforce numbers compared to budgets and payroll spend and that kind of stuff. On the perhaps not so much on a daily basis, but let's say on a weekly basis, I would often look at sickness and turnover stats. So looking at what's changing in that respect, and of course engagement is another important factor, although engagement I think is probably more like a monthly or even a quarterly measure. One of the things that I often check at the end of the week as well is what are our leavers saying. So what are the insights we can derive from our exit survey? So really trying to not just focus on the numerical side of things, but also looking at the softer side of things. So what's the kind of what is the insight we can derive from what our people are saying about our organization?
Yeah, that's great. I think there's often some confusion around the fact that people analytics has to be all quantitative, and with any task that involves human beings and the complexities that we all bring to the table, there will always be a qualitative element. So I'm really glad you mentioned that. Nick, tell us about what metrics are important to you to monitor on a daily or weekly basis.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think this year, especially this year, has thrown up a real different way of how we need to look and think about people data. And so for us, we simplified our message and how we measure it. Our strategy is based on two things. It's happiness and health, right? So we're focusing our data on a daily basis on health, and health is everything from financial health to individual personal health, from sickness days, absence, and looking at the numbers of the business to align to our strategy. And then when we look at happiness, some of the things that Joe mentioned, touched upon there, that is people progressing in new roles, development plans, engagement, turnover, voluntary turnover, all of these things that we have now at our fingertips, we're able to use using tools like Bob or KPI dashboards that we can see it live. And one of the things that you tend to find, especially with data analytics, is you can get into the detail and all of a sudden it becomes a bit blurry. So for us, finding out that actually splitting it between happiness and health has been a very easy, more transparent way to report on it. And then when you start to explore that a bit further, when you're looking at happiness, you're looking at diversity and this diverse workforce that we can start diving into. So we're looking at gender, we're looking at pay gap, percentage of people in different roles. So those are some of the things that we're really nailing our name to, especially moving forward in 2021, especially considering health is the #1 priority for people moving forward into next year and this year especially. So those two pillars for us, and everything that dives down that we'll probably discuss, I'm sure, in depth a bit later on.
Great. And Alina, last but not least, tell us what's important to your process on a daily basis.
Yeah, sure. So maybe even also as a background information, we already had a couple of data, but I joined a couple of months ago with the company, and now we are building this up a bit more. So we are also currently in the process of defining that on a better basis. But based on my past experience and how I see the field is, for me, there's 3 different areas that I like to measure. One is all about the experience. So on a company side, how is the people experience for on the company level in terms of engagement and its drivers, as well as all of the experience with our people and culture team. So we have a couple of measures and KPIs here. For example, when it comes to people support, the tickets, how fast do we solve them? How happy are people with solving that? As well as for all bigger trainings, we have surveys and so on afterwards that measure what could we have done better? How happy are people? What are the key takeaways that I get from it? So this is all about the experience. But then for me, the second category really is about process and how good we are on that front. So that has a lot to do with anything that can be directly cost related or indirectly. So directly meaning how is our budget going, like how do we adhere to our budget when it comes to workplace, but also benefits and so on. How do we compare also with benchmarks compared to other companies? I look at that quite often, as well as then, for example, in the recruiting place, indirectly related, what's our time to hire, what's our cost per hires, and so on. And then lastly, and that's probably something that I look at most often, and Bob also helps quite a bit, is everything that's outcome based. So here I talk about retention rates, D&I markers, how well do we do in terms of pay gap, but also average tenure that we have inside the company, internal moves, and so on. So for me, it's really the 3 components, and that's how I try to split up the employee life cycle as well as categorizing it: experience, process, and outcome.
Fantastic. It seems like all 3 of you have a diverse approach to people analytics, but there are some commonalities, and I think this next question will be really useful to our audience. So we have a question here from one of our attendees about how you justify resources for new spend to your C-level. So I think the context here is that, in 2020 in particular, there have been a lot of unexpected changes. That's one mild way of putting it. And as a result, HR has often needed new resources, new spend, new budget to justify additional tools, additional headcount, many things like that. So, when you're typically presenting to whoever the executive leader is at your organization who controls budget, what are the numbers that you present to get the money that you need for your people? Alina, why don't we start with you?
Sure, happy to. So for me, depending on what kind of money I want, like for what kind of project I want to get the money for, usually it's one of two things. Either it's all about competitiveness, and there what I do is measure the most thought after employers or our direct competitors when it comes to employees, and what do they offer, what is kind of the standard practice, and then seeing do we want to, strategy wise, when it comes to our people and culture strategy, do we want to match that, and for what reason? So that's one area. And then the other thing, and that probably happens more often, whenever I request budget, I think about the return on investment based on the numbers that our C-level cares most about. So for some of the things, it's all about getting the data, and it's all available in the internet, on average scores of how can this reduce turnover or absenteeism, or how can it reduce our recruiting cost, and then basically just matching that investment sum versus what is the return in the end. I think the key here is just figuring out what does the C-level really care about and linking everything I do to their data.
Fair enough. Joe, any tips you can share on persuading the C-suite to open up the pocketbook?
So I think it does really kind of depend on what kind of team it is, what kind of resource you're requesting. But I think so you can kind of tailor your approach based on that. But one kind of thing that has always worked quite well for me is if you present it in clear terms, in clear supply and demand terms. So if you think about your workforce as a supply, and there is a driving factor that's driving up demand for the services or products that your company provides. If you're able to demonstrate the need for additional headcount in those terms, that you do require the additional supply in order to meet demand, increasing demand, I think that can be quite powerful, as well as framing this in the context of why do we exist as an organization. What are our operational and key strategic objectives? So those, if you're able to combine focus on strategic objectives with the kind of justification around supply and demand, I think you're on a good track.
Yeah, interesting.
And Nick, what about you?
Yeah, so I think this is a really hot one, right? Especially in 2020, where we've had to pivot as a department, as a function, into so many different things. Using numbers, you can use numbers to justify what you're doing. You can use KPIs to paint a bit of a better picture, or you can use them to shock and awe your C-suite into making action, right? What I mean by that is if what we've always had access to this data as a department, as a function, right? But now we've got tools that make it clear as day what it means. And if we use something as simple as sickness, and we've used something, if you drill down to sickness and why are people leaving you, or why are people taking days off, and the biggest cause of that at the moment is, besides COVID, is stress, right? So if you can start to monetize a sickness day into your organization, times that by the amount of days that are being taken by your business, which you can do quite straightforward, you can shock and awe your C-suite by going, we're doing nothing and it's costing us $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, depending on the size of your organization. What you follow that up with is something called a minimal viable product. You guys who follow an agile mindset will know exactly what that is, right? So you start with a very small, cheap, quick, easy solution that might fix it. And you started with that, you play with that. And you tell your C-suite, this cost me nothing, yeah, or very, very little to put that solution in place. I'll tell you an example. If you don't have any systems in place and you're thinking about it, you could spend a couple of $100 on a SurveyMonkey license just to get feedback from your team, your department, about something we could do to fix it. All of a sudden, you've got data you didn't have before, and next you go to a C-suite, look, this is what we've got, and this is what we can do now, and that was only cost that. But if we invest a little bit more, this is what we can do, and this is how it's going to close that gap. So you're using that data to shock or prove your point there's a problem, but you don't just leave it there and say there's a big issue, look at the mirror, look in here. It's actually saying, look, this is the issue, but here, look at this solution, it doesn't cost anything, it's going to save us loads of money. And you've just proved your concept. What you've done by proving that concept is you built trust in your C-suite. You go, yeah, I trusted you with that. You came to me, I didn't know it was the problem. You came to me, I trusted you, you executed it. Of course, I'm going to trust you now with 10, 20, 30,000 to to put something more in place. So I think we have this conception sometimes that we felt we're a bit hard done by. We need this big suite, and the C-suite going, okay, great, justify it, and you go through a big business planning process. Start with something small, a minimal viable product that proves your point, and then you get the trust, and then you can use that trust, and then you action it with purpose, and then move forward and impose your will on them once you've gained their trust in that first point. So that's can be applied to anything you're trying to implement across the life cycle.
Yeah, I think this concept of like the minimum viable product is huge because we all have dealt with executives who have sticker shock when it comes to purchasing new tools. And particularly within HR, it is a hard domain in which to justify spend. It's not like digital marketing where you can figure out exactly what you put in is what you get out. There is a lot of variability in terms of the usefulness of different tools and different initiatives. And so I think that's a great bridge for a C-level who is a little reluctant to fully open the floodgates when it comes to HR spending.
Yeah, I think just very quickly, just touch on that point. C-suite levels also, they don't know what they don't know, and they also tend to say, I want this, but I don't really know what this looks like. Yeah, so it's about saying, actually, oh, I know exactly what you need, and you go away and you build it and you put it, even though they have no idea, but you know exactly what they're talking about, and you say, this is what's going to fill that gap for you. So remember, they don't know what they don't know, and it's important that you come to the table and advise on a partnering level to say, I've got the solution that's going to solve all this. Just trust me, let's go. Yeah. So it's kind of that element too. So.
Quick follow-up on that.
Oh, sorry, Alina.
Just a quick note on that one. I think trust is a really important topic, and I think key to develop that is starting also with some products that are not as expensive, but then always following up and pointing out what the data that you have achieved with it, the improvements that you have seen were, and then through that, once they've seen first results, they trust you with more and more money. So that helps as well.
Just that makes a lot of sense. I have a question here that sort of turns the tables. So this last question was about how the metrics that you present to the C-suite voluntarily for your needs. One of our attendees, Alicia, would love to know what are the biggest metrics and asks that your C-suite team has made of you during the past year? What metrics have they been asking of from you, and how do you go about collecting and gathering them? So, Nick, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I think interesting this year has been, I mean, immediately we wanted to know across the group, where were our people working and how were they working, right? So what portion of across Europe who was still in offices, who was away from work for sickness and absence reasons. So sickness, and this is where our strategy of happiness and health formed, is that health piece. Our C-suite immediately went, we need to protect our people and we need to go healthy. Like, how do we keep our people safe? So immediately we had to go, right, well, that's a really good point, because actually we're also, not only are we going into this sort of remote work environment, how do we make people safe at home as well, and a whole program to go into that. So sickness and absence and health and remote working, where people are doing their work, was a big ask. And the second one was all of a sudden this new way of working came into play, and people were starting to leave. Not just our organization, but I saw a report from LinkedIn saying 1/3 of people in work are looking for different work as a result of this. So we wanted to capture that post. I think Joe mentioned it earlier on. Why are people leaving? Yeah. So that attrition rates became a big hot topic. So it's sickness, absence, it's attrition and engagement, and what are people actually telling us? So those are sort of the three big ones that we're looking for at the moment for us.
Great. Alina, are you noticing anything different on your end in terms of, what your C-suite has been requesting in 2020?
Yeah. So maybe also judging not only from the company I currently work for, but most of the year I was still with another company. And I think talking about the topic of remote work, all of the questions were also about productivity. So we wanted to know, has productivity increased for what teams, for which one has a decrease, and what can we do in order to focus on that? So we had to look at all of the teams. For some of them, we measured simple things such as tickets. So that was quite easy to analyze the data and seeing dips, but also sales calls and basically taking that data while accounting for differences in the economic environment. So I think that just with regards to remote work was a big topic. The second one, the organization was very much driven by values and how much people feel that values are still lived and are still visible also when moving more remotely. So we had a tailored engagement survey that we did quite often that also focused on KPIs that we develop for our values and seeing how well are they still performing, have they changed at all with us not being in the office all the time together, and we use that data then to change our engagement formats later on in terms of collaboration and so on. But overall, the year was also a lot about budget and cost and so on. So a lot of the data was about where can we also save cost? Are we really top notch when it comes to our recruiting costs? Are we really top notch when it comes to absenteeism, like sick days, as Nick also mentioned, as well as basically when it comes to the performance, as well as being like cost conscious. What have we spent money on beforehand just by being in the office? Is that still necessary? Can we find more innovative ways that we have currently worked on that can reduce spend on that front as well?
Yeah, that I think the concept of innovation within this sphere is big, right? Because I think often C-levels are looking not just for ways to maintain, but ways to grow and evolve. And I think HR can actually contribute a ton there compared to other domains within the company. So I'm glad that you touched on that, Alina. Joe, tell us a little bit about what your C-suite has sort of demanded of you in recent months.
I think it's broadly quite similar to what both Nick and Alina have described. The one thing that is gaining a lot of interest at the moment is EDI. So equality, diversity, and inclusivity. So we've actually kicked off a major data collection exercise to help us capture all the information that we want to collect and monitor when it comes to EDI. So that's currently in progress. Sickness also featured quite often, in particular mental health sickness, just to see if there is any if there is anything that we need to be mindful of, or any kind of alarm bells ringing anywhere. But one interesting question that I have recently been asked is, can we develop something that will help us measure burnout? So develop some kind of a mechanism, some kind of a measure that will alert us when we are hitting a critical point when it comes to burnout during the current situation. And that's a really tricky one, because how do you actually measure burnout? Or how do you so that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is how do you actually develop something that will alert you before you get to that point where it's too late to do anything? So we're exploring options at the moment, and one of those options is actually looking at Microsoft Analytics, workplace analytics even, where we can look at the usage across the organization of our IT infrastructure and how our employees use the services, and ideally, if we can kind of link that with what our employees are saying in our engagement survey, I think that those two things combined will provide some powerful insights that would help us to answer that particular question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think like burnout is real, right? And so I think we're learning that more than ever in 2020. Hopefully next year will be a little bit better from that perspective, but especially with nowhere to go and where your office and your living room are mere steps apart usually. It has been a very challenging year, and so I think we will see more and more on the people analytics front. Certainly at Bob, we're developing more and more tools to help address this for fast-growing companies, and so hopefully there will be a lot more to come on this. I have a question from Gemma here in our audience. She's a junior people analyst, and so she would like some advice from our experts here on the panel on how to build a foundation in people analytics. So if you have no experience with reporting, our panel here happens to be exceptionally data oriented due to maybe past careers and things like that. But what advice would you give to someone who maybe has a more traditional HR background, who's junior and who has not had experience in people analytics? Where do they get started? Alina, kick us off.
Sure. So I feel there's different areas of the KPIs that you can touch upon where you would start. For me, when it comes to, as I mentioned, like the experience part, it really makes sense to just have a rough look at the employee lifecycle and just thinking about one particular thing for each stage of the life cycle that you believe is important, and then trying to find the data for that. Either you build targeted surveys for it, which can be done with anything like a Typeform or SurveyMonkey, as well as then thinking about in a second step, really what kind of drivers do you see for the performance also of your company? What have you heard from maybe also the C-level that they're concerned about, and then trying to find these kind of data in your database, and that can be done as like one of the evergreens kind of is turnover rate, it's growth rate, new joiners versus leavers. And even if you hopefully you have an HRIS, but even if you don't, you probably have at least an Excel list of people joining you with a date in there. So just by doing an Excel pivot table through that, you can get already the first data that is necessary. So for me, it would be really a mixture of the experienced ones, where I would start just thinking about what are the key points that are important for me in the employee lifecycle. Maybe also based on what you think is currently not working so well. What are the key pain points that you want to quantify? And then also from more of the KPI perspective, what do people really care about? And very simply, just trying to find that in your employee database, and usually no fancy systems needed for that.
Yep. Nick, what about you? What are your tips for beginners here in people analytics?
Yeah, so this was from Gemma. Sorry, was this the question?
Yep.
Yeah, so Gemma, I think my advice getting one, you're going into the right field of HR. You're future proofing. Well done. But also, I think whenever you start something out new, first of all, dig into the stuff that you're really passionate about. Right. So what interests you the most? Why are you doing it in the first place? And pick, as Alina said, pick a point of the employee life cycle that really gets you excited about finding out more. Start there, right? So if it's recruitment, find out where are you getting these people from? How are they coming in? How long does it take to hire new people? God, and then you start collecting all this data yourself. And if that gets you really excited, then you move on to another piece of the employee life cycle, because starting where you're passionate about is how you'll grow, you'll learn more, you'll go, you'll read. And then the key thing to do is, once you have all this great information, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, talk to people about it, talk to your line manager, talk to your peers, talk to people down the hall. If it's make sure it's not too sensitive so you can share. But it's important that you're talking to other people about what you found, right? Because that's closing your loop. And if you're going to expand and then grow and build something, that's how you're going to do it. You're going to talk about it. They're going to share insights. They're going to say, "Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that it took us 3 months to hire." Like, yeah, and then you can start to burrow into the actual analytics piece. You're not just churning out numbers. You're partnering the business, because then you're saying, actually, if we did this differently, we could reduce that by half, and that's where it gets really exciting, because you're making real business impact and change just by starting with something you're passionate about. So that's it, right? Start at the core. What really, what are you hungry about? What is it you want to dive into? Start there, and see where it goes. Don't close any doors, and just experiment, play with it. It's an awesome time to be in this sort of realm of work with P&C, people and culture. But yeah, start there.
Yeah, that's a fabulous advice, because I think so many people from our community here at HiBob have told us that over communication is really the key to a lot of success within HR. Keeping stuff to yourself does no good. And even though the people you're sharing it with, whether they're senior to you, whether they're your peers, they may not be people the way that our panelists on this call are. But even then, these metrics do get people starting to think about how they can better their process, and ultimately that road always circles back to HR. So I think that's really good advice, Nick.
Yeah, I think just to finish on that, I think we talk about the title here is C-suite, right? But really, apart from that, your real stakeholders are the people who are talking to people every day in the business. Your middle management, that layer is who in anything you implement, you need their buy-in. Otherwise it's going to get nowhere. So you get that sign off, but you got to getting them excited, because you're excited is how you're going to start to spread, so, for sure.
Absolutely. Joe, any tips for Gemma here on how she can kick off a foundation in people analytics?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Nick just there. I think my advice would be don't try do it all at once. So if you think about maybe we're talking about like developing that analytical capability maturity. So what might be helpful is to just segment it into 3 key stages where you start something. You start with answering with looking back, so your reporting will be kind of hindsight reporting. You're looking backwards to see what happened, and the questions you'll be able to answer is exactly that, what happened. And then as you kind of progress into your next phase, the next phase might be insight reporting. So you start to combine the what with other kind of data segments to identify some of the causes for why it might be happening. So what's driving something happening. And then the third level would be your kind of your foresight reporting. So this is where you kind of get into the what if. So yeah, maturity, if from a maturity kind of capability point of view, segments it into those levels. But ultimately, the goal here is to actually empower line managers and directors across the whole organizations, including your finance and HR business partners, empower them with management information so that they can do the job the best they can.
Absolutely. Nick, we have a question here for you. It's from kind of 2 questions in one from Daniel, one from A. Reed, but sort of similar. Because you mentioned burnout, what is the best way to evaluate like your employees' mental health from a data perspective, since they're working from home these days? Like, how are you able to gather that feedback, and how do you operationalize that feedback?
First and foremost, the key to mental health, the key to burnout is education. It's the same with diversity and inclusion. If you do not know, if your line managers, if you as an individual do not know what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it operates as, you can't do anything about it. And it's the same with data. Unless you can bring that to life, they're just numbers on a page, right? So when we're talking about burnout, when we're talking about mental health, I would start by saying, how many times is your line manager connecting with their employees, if we're talking data terms, right? So Microsoft ran a really interesting thing where employees said they felt more stressed out, more pressure, the less managers were connecting with them on a weekly basis. So think about when your managers, well, now we're all remote, what happens when you don't get spoken to for a day, 2, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks? You start to overthink. I'm at risk. Oh, what's happening? No one's talking to me. No one's connected with me. These things coming in. All of a sudden, your world is coming in on yourself. And it's at this point where we've actually got to go, the manager's got to go make more connections, more informally, yeah, and they've got to be educated to understand what the sign is, yeah. So when you're connecting with someone and they don't see themselves, what does that actually look like, yeah? And how are managers capturing that, and how are they linking in? So it starts with education. It starts as a HR business partner, as a lead, to say, actually, when are you connecting with them? How often are you connecting with them? And what are you seeing when you are connecting with them? And start talking about it, setting up these interventions regularly. Otherwise, managers will go, oh, I think they were okay, but carry on with their work because they're all tunnel vision, right? So spend the time, and this doesn't actually have to equate to much in terms of monetary value either. Spend the time in talking to managers and start a conversation. What do you know about mental health? There is so much out there now that you yourself as a HR professional should be reading up on in terms of how you spot the signs of when someone is feeling the strain, yeah? You can see it, take the time to understand and speak and listen and let them listen. And that's how you're going to then, okay, cool, implement it. And some of the great stuff that Joe's talking around with measuring, output of machines, I'm imagining that's going down the route of, you can see someone's logged in at 7 a.m. and logged out at 7 p.m., 10 p.m. And then if you can combine that with the softer education that managers should be getting now, if they're not, you've got to push that really hard now. Next year, January, everyone goes through some basic awareness piece. You'll get the data to say, okay, this person, we need to intervene at this point. We have such a habit of coming in too late, yeah? The world has a habit of coming too late, yeah? If, for example, I take the UK, we lock down too late. It's just an example of things that we're doing too late. So it's just being aware, getting that educational piece out, and where you can measure, machinery, productivity, life, data, do it. Education, Yeah, education is absolutely everything for burnout, and it's key, and it's going to be so important next year. Yeah,
that's phenomenal insight. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I say this as someone who obviously works for an HR tech platform, but solving all problems within HR does not require a platform. There are like so many free and cheap resources out there that you can use and operationalize just to get yourself started. So that was really great insight, Nick. Thank you.
pleasure.
Alina, this question is for you from Tanya. It's circling back to something we talked about earlier, which is this concept of like people support and tickets around that. Talk a little bit about the tools you use and also like what the impact of having this sort of people support program has been internally.
Yeah, sure. So actually, that's something that the team has done way before I joined. But it's actually really fascinating to see, because on that level of professionalism, I haven't seen it in many earlier stage or later stage startups later on. So basically, what the system is that is used, it's similar to one of the systems that often also IT departments inside the company use, where people can just put in the ticket. And I think for us, it's similar to like a Zendesk kind of system, where you just define what your request is in terms of different categories that you can individualize on the site, and you put in the data that you need. Somebody can grab the ticket, work through it, answer directly in the system, and then the person hopefully has the request resolved. So interesting to measure here is both obviously the number of tickets that you resolve throughout the month, and that you can combine with more proactive information that you share throughout the company. So at Zenjob, for example, we also have a Confluence page where a lot of the data and information that people are requesting, we also have on an intranet kind of page where the information is shared. So it's interesting to combine the two. Whenever you publish something new in terms of information in that field of tickets, do the tickets go down? Do people actually also interact with that kind of page? So the number of tickets overall is a great source to measure how good is your information spreading, what kind of tickets are usually put in there. Is it more asking questions? Is it more requests of things that either they could have done themselves, or that needs to be done by the organization? That also helps you for workforce planning going forward. How many people do you need in your team in order to, with a growing organization, number of tickets per employee, how much people support people do you need in the org itself? And then obviously in the end, what counts is not only speed and number, but it's also about the satisfaction of the results. Through that, you can measure how good a job the team is doing in explaining it, and that obviously drives back to people experience, which is what I'm all about. So yeah, this is how it works at Zenjob, at least, and I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. I love that this full cycle theory of like it helps you gather feedback, then you operationalize that feedback, and then you get feedback on the feedback. Yeah, very cool. Joe, last question here from our audience for you. The question is from Naimbora. Because you mentioned EDI and that being a priority, do you have any advice for how to surface, the EDI? I think in America the acronym is D&I, but whatever it is, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, and then gender-related diversity initiatives. How do you surface these when they always seem to be like third or fourth on the list, right? There's always like pressing revenue-related matters that seem to rise above it, and she can't get her executive team to really understand the impact that it would have on the organization. Do you have any tips for sort of surfacing that to the C-suite?
So I think my best advice would be that to put it in the context of actually employee engagement, because if people feel that they are treated unfairly, or you can clearly demonstrate, for example, through when you're looking at your staff survey results and there is an apparent lack of parity amongst your different workforce segments, that kind of indicates that something's going on. And if you're able to actually put this in a context of happy workforce, engaged workforce, and people need to be feel that they are treated fairly, and so that you can unlock that kind of discretionary effort and actually presents this as something that has a huge impact on employee engagement, and therefore it does have an impact on the company's bottom line, because happy, engaged employees equals more productive employees.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think if you have to tie everything back to dollars and cents, the impact that happiness and productivity have on your bottom line is critical, and I think that's a good approach.
Just to finish Joe's point, I think also if you look at the data of diverse companies at the top level, the most successful companies have a diverse board. Not just one way. If you go and look at aspirational businesses, my advice is go look at what company do you want to be like, and go look at their senior exec team, look at how diverse it is, and look at the data that suggests when more women are on a C-suite level than men, and look at the data of the performance of the businesses. It goes up. So yeah, it goes back to data, but yeah, big one.
Just to add to this as well, there is also the question about how do you know that you've got a diversity problem. So I think it's important that you compare to some kind of either local or national benchmarks. So look at not necessarily like UK population census or anything like that, but it's just being able to show that the workforce that you've got does represent, broadly speaking, the customers that you serve, and as Nick said, at all levels, starting from the board, executive team, senior leadership, and the rest of the workforce.
Absolutely. I couldn't think of a finer point to end us here on than diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm happy that everybody got to contribute their thoughts on that. As we move forward to the next part of our webinar, I am so thankful that all three of you took time out of your extremely busy schedules to be here. We weren't even able to get through all of the questions, but I know that the insights that you had were fabulous for our audience, and yeah, we look forward to hearing more from you, perhaps in future sessions or things like that. So thank you so much for taking the time. And yeah, we learned a lot. I know I did, and I'm sure our audience did as well. Yeah, Keshet, are you with us?
Yes, hello everyone.
Hello. So, I'd love to introduce our audience to Keshet Rosenthal. She's the Director of Product here at HiBob, one of the most innovative people in our building when it comes to developing cutting edge tools to help our fast-growing modern companies that we work with create a better environment for their people, and ultimately use people analytics to drive better engagement within the workforce. And so she's going to walk you through a little bit about how HiBob tackles people analytics, our philosophy, and yeah, I can't wait to see what she has to share. So Keshet, I'm going to make you the presenter here. Before Keshet kicks off, I'm going to launch a poll really quickly. So we've talked a lot about what. Actually, no, I'm going to wait and launch the poll after Keshet does her presentation. So give me 1 second. Let me make you the presenter. Bear with us, audience. This handoff is always a little awkward. All right, Keshet, you have presenting capabilities, so please take it away.
Yes, so let me see. Okay. Yes, okay, so I believe that I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, yep. Perfect. So again, hello everyone. It was fascinating to listen to you. I think this is a topic we're very much passionate about. So quickly, I will just introduce myself. I joined HiBob 3 years ago. I'm Director of Product Management. I'm dealing mostly with core HR, but I'm very much passionate about everything related to do with people analytics and how you utilize data to gain insight about the workforce and to help the business grow. So what I want to do is just to quickly demo you what we have in Bob. I prepared some examples ahead just to make sure we'll make the best out of the time that we have. And let me just start. Okay. So you can find our KPIs dashboards within the analytics section in Bob, where you can, in just a quick overview, you can set the date range of the time frame you want to check, the time periods view if you want to see the data monthly, quarterly, or yearly. you can see a high-level summary of the metrics on the top of each category, which also good time to mention that we divided our KPIs into 4 different categories: growth, retention, finance, and absenteeism. And in each one of the KPIs, you can actually filter according to specific criteria in the organization. And this is something that is built according to the way you enter the data into the system. So you can actually slice and dice it by your criteria and what makes you interested about. And you can also group by different criteria to make sure you could compare and again, view different visualization. So I think it was brought up a few times, everything related to diversity, equality, inclusion. And I think that it became even, it was always a hot topic, but I think that in the past year with the Black Lives Matters, and we see the importance, as you mentioned, how diversity actually contributes to a company's success. So what we allow you to see is basically your headcount. You could see it according to gender, to see the different gender in the organization. You could filter to see what is the gender distribution in, let's say, in a specific department or site. Let me quickly just show an example. And you can also do the same with ethnicity or minority if you capture this information, but also according to different age group. We know that when we talk about diversity, we also talk about the generation that you have in the organization. You want to make sure to hire and to develop people from different age groups. So this is additional layout you can check the data according to. And another thing that is very interesting to track, and you also mentioned, will be the turnover and the attrition rates. So we know that some turnover is actually healthy for a company. We don't want to be in some kind of stagnation mode. We want employees to join, to leave, to change, and even we also from time to time we see some sliding doors. People who left the company will come back to us within a year or two. So we want to make sure that we maintain a healthy turnover rate, but even more so when we compare the rates, we want to learn why employees are leaving the company on their own will. And this refers to actually to the attrition rate. So if we look at the attrition rate, I can actually go and better analyze the reason who made people leave the organization. I can learn, again, if I have a high attrition rate within a specific department, specific business unit, it will help me identify areas of risk and maybe take some actions to improve this high attrition. It is also very interesting to see the different reasons for leaving the company when we come to group the levers. And if to tie it back to everything that we discussed about diversity and inclusivity, it's very interesting to measure how many minorities are leaving and when. How long do they tend to stay in the company? We want to learn if they are feeling inclusive, if they tend to stay for a long time, or if they leave relatively right after they have been hired. And again, this is something that we can track and to learn how distribution goes between different departments. So here, for example, I can see the average tenure of employees in months in the different department, and this will help me to pinpoint any issues that I have in a specific business unit, and I can track it over time. So when later on we come to present that into the C-suite, and we want to engage the executive on the activities that we're doing, we can show how this differ over time and what were the results of our actions. Another quick example I want to show you, and Alina, you referred to that, will be the pay gap in the organization. So we know that talking about pay gap, is usually won't be very much insightful just by measuring the pay gap itself. But this is the place where starting to compare either, again, different departments or employees in different levels, or if we want to compare, again, specific job titles, we want to make sure that engineers in the same level, men and women, are earning more or less the same. So this is where we need to slice and dice the data and to gain insight and to see how the actions we're taking, if it's some kind of correction towards a compensation event, or if it's making sure that when we hire new employees, we propose a fair pay. So this will be the place to look for that information and to better analyze that and to bring back to the table. And maybe one more thing that is worth mentioning, you brought up the mental health, I would say, aspects that we've been dealing in the past year. So we have in Bob, I didn't prepare an example, but we do have the engagement surveys that could be used exactly for that, to make sure, to use pulse surveys, to make sure that your employees are engaged, or if they suffer from fatigue, if they work too hard. So this will be the place for that. And if you correlate that information with the attrition, you can gain, again, very meaningful insights regarding to your company health.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kesha. Yeah, like I think why I'm proudest of our analytics tools is because it takes, HR, which, because we deal with people, is traditionally a very mystical and, enigmatic part of the business, and really gives you insights into why the things that are happening are happening. Any business metric is predictable, and ultimately these analytics go a long way towards helping HR either predict or forecast things that may go wrong, or celebrate the things that are going right. And so I love that we as a tool empower our companies to do that. With that in mind, I'm launching a poll here to our audience. So for those of you who are with us, if you after seeing a little bit of what Kesha demoed here, if you'd love to set up a personalized overview of HiBop, where we talk a little bit about what's important to you as a company, we can talk a little bit about what we do specifically with companies in your industry. We can talk through the data analytics and data points that are most important for you. Feel free to complete this poll, and we will have someone from our team reach out to schedule it. The greatest thing about the personalized overviews that we give to potential customers is that we really do focus on what's unique about your business, where we can drive the greatest productivity and change that is important to you. And ultimately, if you're dealing with issues in the sphere of burnout, diversity, equity, and inclusion, not being able to aggregate enough data to support or get the resourcing that you need for your team, Bob is a phenomenal tool that can help with all of that. So let me keep this up for just a couple more minutes, or a couple more seconds, sorry. All right. So close the poll. Thank you so much, Keshet, for your time today, and for showing us what we do here internally. Like I said, I'm really proud of it. I know you are as well. Thank you again so much to our panelists. Thank you to Alina, to Nick, to Joe, for all of the insights you shared. Thank you so much to our audience, most of all, who has been engaged tremendously through this process, asked a lot of really good, meaty questions. This webinar, like all of our webinars, will be recorded and available to watch on demand online. If you've registered for this webinar, you'll get a copy of that recording in your email as well, in case you want to rewatch or send to somebody in your organization. But like always, we thank you so much for your time. I'm Ali with the HiBop marketing team, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.